Shweta, start. Shweta, start.
Yes, ma'am. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions, recollected in tranquility. The famous quote by William Wordsworth speaks it all. Indeed, poetry is an expression of emotion, joy, sorrow, gallantry, timidity, patriotism, innocence, shrewdness. All these emotions can be experienced while going through the lines of poems. A very warm good afternoon to one and all present here. I, Dr. Shweta Paliwal, Assistant Professor, Rungta College of Engineering and Technology, Raipur, welcome you all to the 6th Dr. Jb Singh Memorial Lecture organized by English Language Teachers Association of India, Raipur chapter on this virtual platform. The moment I got to know about the topic of today's webinar, that is Botanical Imagination, Vegetal Bodies in Poetry, it reminded me of a famous quote by William Wordsworth. I quote, "One impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral, evil, and of good than all the sages can." Definitely, there is a lot to learn from nature. It inspires and motivates to move on. It gives joy and peace. It gives a reason to celebrate life and a lot more. Now, without any further ado, let's begin with the lamp lighting ceremony. With folded hands, I pay my heartfelt tribute to JB Sir. He was indeed a noble soul. Now, I would like to request Dr. Savita Singh for the welcome speech. Over to you, ma'am. Dr. Savita Singh is a professor of Government Nagarjuna PG College of Science, Department of English, and also invited faculty in SOS in Language and Literature, Pandit Ravi Shankar Shukla University, Raipur. With a rich teaching experience of 27 years at UG and PG level, she has guided more than 50 MPhil dissertations. 60 PhDs have been awarded under her supervision. She is the convener of ELT, that is English Language Teachers Association of India, Raipur chapter, and has organized 4 national conferences for Chhattisgarh English Teachers Association. Over to you, ma'am.
Good morning. Pranam. Jai Johar from Raipur, Chhattisgarh, the tribal heart of India. What is Jai Johar? Jai Johar means paying tribute to nature that blesseth us all. Johar means the entire fascinating gamut of nature, the sun, moon, and stars, the hills, rivers, forests, the flora and fauna. We in Chhattisgarh salute the nurturing power of nature. The Adivasis of Chhattisgarh, who have inhabited these lands since time immemorial, have deep faith in nature, and their faith is full of reverence, love, and immense gratitude. Jai Johar, Jai Chhattisgarh. So, also the relevance and importance of the topic of the lecture today: Botanical Imagination, Vegetal Bodies in Poetry. I feel honored to welcome you all to the 6th Dr. Jb Singh Memorial Lecture organized by the Raipur chapter of the English Language Teachers Association of India. ELT, as it is popularly called, is the oldest association of English teachers in India, and its contribution in the field of English is commendable. The Raipur chapter is an active body which organizes many programs to propagate English. I extend a grateful welcome to our resource person, Dr. Dinesh Nair, an erudite scholar and academician, joining us from Mumbai. Welcome, sir. I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Shukla Banerjee, a senior English professor, joining us from Raipur. I welcome Mrs. Chitrangi Iyer, a committed teacher and educationist, and a close family friend who is joining us from Jabalpur. I welcome Mr. Amit Jha, an alumni of Royal Kids Convent, Rajnandgaon, a brilliant engineer working with Emerson, and who is joining us all the way from US across timelines. I extend a hearty welcome to all the enthusiastic participants, scholars, and academicians who have joined us today for this enlightening lecture. It is said, life brings tears, smiles, and memories. The tears dry, the smiles fade, but memories last forever. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal, but love leaves a memory no one can steal. Dr. Jb Singh was the epitome of love, and his little acts of kindness and little acts of love are remembered with deep sense of affection by all whose lives he had touched. Memories are not a key to the past, but a key to the future. His life and personality has a lot to teach us about being a good human being and about living and celebrating life to the least. The Dr. Jb Singh Memorial Lecture Series is an attempt to offer tribute to the man, the persona that he was, and all that he stood for. Welcome, dear friends. Thank you for joining us today. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Shilpi Bhattacharya for giving a brief about ELT, that is English Language Teachers Association of India. Dr. Shilpi Bhattacharya is the president of ELT Raipur chapter. She is a professor and dean in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Kalinga University. With over 19 years of teaching experience, She has chaired technical sessions in many national and international conferences. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta. It's truly an honor for me to speak about an organization that we have seen growing from a seedling to a strong tree. The English Language Teachers Association of India, ELTI, is the largest network of teachers of English in India and was founded on 7th August 1969 by a noted educationist late Padma Shri S. Natarajan. It is again a matter of great honor for me to be a part of ELTI Raipur chapter, the foundation of which was laid in 2011, and now it has grown to a prominent entity with over 250 members. Right from its inception, it has grown exponentially in terms of reaching out to teachers and learners of English language, not only in Raipur but also in nearby areas. ELTI Raipur chapter strives to become a pioneer in spreading English literacy amongst the students and teachers of the region, and thereby endeavors to promote professional excellence amongst its members in all possible ways. To reach to the highest echelons of its vision, ELTI Raipur chapter marched ahead and marked its visibility amongst educationists, academicians, and students at national and international platforms. Since 2012, the inception year of this chapter, it has conducted a series of workshops, lectures, and other academic activities. Many eminent speakers like Mahesh Dattani, the famous playwright, Miss Enid Kerr, a renowned teacher trainer, Dr. Chumki Vishwas, resource person from Oxford University Press, Dr. Meera Palani, a resource person from Cambridge University Press, professors from Vishwabharati University, Shantiniketan, Sambalpur University, Lucknow University, Pandit Ravi Shankar Shukla University, and many such reputed institution addressed the huge gathering on this platform. Not only this, the ELTI Raipur chapter is always inclined towards social welfare. It has worked with NSS on several occasions, and with the RKC Seva Samiti, it successfully conducted numerous classes on English language acquisition for underprivileged children on Saturdays for 2 consecutive years. In the year 2017, in memory of our beloved teacher and educationist and the principal of Rajkumar College, Dr. Jb Singh, the ELTI Raipur chapter initiated the Dr. Jb Singh Memorial Lecture Series. Every year since then, the lecture series is conducted successfully. 5 memorial lectures have been conducted so far, and renowned vice chancellors, professors, and intellectuals graced the occasion with their thoughts and ideas. In the series of webinars conducted by various chapters of ELTI, the ELTI Raipur chapter hosted national webinar number 34 and also collaborated for webinars with ELTI Pune chapter. Despite the existing crisis of the pandemic, and despite of this being a Sunday afternoon, we got a registration of 498. That itself speaks of the magnitude of the events conducted by ELTI Raipur chapter. I'm sure, with the exceptional guidance and support of our senior professors and a team of strong and zealous members, ELTI Raipur chapter will achieve great stature and success in the years to come. So thank you. Stay connected with us till we announce the next mega event of ELTI Raipur chapter. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am. People we love from the bottom of our heart stay there forever and ever, whether they are physically present or not. Memorial Lecture Series is just a way of cherishing the beautiful memories and paying tribute to our loved ones. Dr. Jb Singh's Memorial Lecture is one such endeavor. Dr. Sunaina Mishra will give an introduction of Dr. Jb Singh, former Principal Rajkumar College. Dr. Sunaina Mishra is a professor in Government Nagarjuna PG College of Science. With over 35 years of teaching experience, she has guided 6 research scholars and penned a beautiful book with the title Paramparik Dharohar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta. A very good afternoon to all. Dr. Jb Singh, I don't think so he needs any introduction. But still, as the formalities, Dr. Jb Singh, an educationist, a visionary, was born on 29th January 59. He had his schooling from Rajkumar College, Raipur, Chhattisgarh. Later, he did his UG from Allahabad University, then PG in Mathematics and Ancient History from Ravi Shankar Shukla University, and LLB from the same university. He started his career as a school teacher at Rajkumar College, and then he became the housemaster, bursar, and was appointed the principal in 1995. He's had 38 years of teaching experience, in which 20 years he has served as the principal of Rajkumar College, setting a record in the history of RKC as the longest serving principal of the institution, which was established in 1882. As a principal, he has devotedly served the institution, and under his guidance, the school, it reached its zenith, and he has held many important posts as an executive member of Council for the Indian School Certificate Examination, executive member of the Indian Public School, and many such prestigious posts. He attended the World Conference on Education in Ukraine and was appointed as the Education Ambassador. A versatile, multidimensional personality, blessed with sharp intellect and humanitarian approach to life. He won many awards for sports, debate, quiz, competitions. He was awarded the prestigious Gyanshri Award for Intelligence and Knowledge. Besides that, he has been honored with many awards in recognition and appreciation for contribution in the field of education. Dr. Jb Bahadur Singh had keen interest in theatre, and he wrote many plays, acted in Chhattisgarhi films, and formed the Sankalp Sanskriti Samiti, which was involved in staging plays. He organized the Smart Cricket Club, which held inter-school cricket matches. Dr. Jb Singh, an educationist and teacher par excellence, was a kind humanitarian, intellectual, divinely blessed with exceptional skills of emotionally powerful leadership qualities. With immense spiritual insight, he has left behind a rich legacy which shall always be cherished in the spirit of Royal Kids Convent, his school which was established in 1984 at Rajnandgaon. Now, please view the glimpses from the life journey of Dr. Jb Singh. The tribute paid at the background is composed and recited by Mr. Acharya Ranjan Modak, Head of the Department of Hindi, Rajkumar College, Raipur, Chhattisgarh. Thank you. Over to Shweta.
Please play the video.
रमाकांत जी,
मैं यही हूँ मैं, मत सोचो कि मैं चले गया हूँ। हाँ, अब स्थिर हो गया हूँ, देख सकता हूँ तुम्हें, सुन भी सकता हूँ तुम्हारी बातें, बस बोल नहीं सकता हूँ। मत सोचो कि मैं कहाँ हूँ, क्योंकि मैं यहीं हूँ। ध्यान से देखो नन्हे बच्चों की फुलवारियों में, इन बच्चों की मुस्कानों में कली से फूल बनते बाल युवा मन में। मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। त्योहारों में त्योहार, होली का त्योहार, रंग बिरंगे रंगों का त्योहार, गुलाल और चूड़ी रंग में, नगाड़ों की थाप में मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। देखो तुम रुकना मत, जरूर लाना रंग गुलाल। मैं आऊंगा, मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। हर नाटक में, नाटक की कहानियों और किरदारों में, संगीत की हर धुन में मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। बस मेरे लिए एक जगह दिल में बनाए रखना। मैं आऊंगा, मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। किताब के हर पन्नों में, क्लासरूम्स में मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। कर्तव्यों का पाठ और सपनों का महल जो तुम्हें दिया है मैंने, लगन से संवारना उसे, क्योंकि तुम्हारी उस लगन में मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। मैं आऊंगा हर जगह, हर कदम पर। बस तुम पुकारना मुझे, मैं तुम्हें मिलूंगा। सच कहता हूं, मेरा विश्वास करो, मैं यहीं हूं मैं तुम्हारे पास।
Thank you for the video, Ramakanji. I'm sure that you all will agree that Dr. J.B. Singh was a multi-dynamic personality, blessed with countless skills. Now, we have amongst us an influential personality, Dr. Shukla Banerjee, who has a very emotional connect with our beloved J.B. Sir. Dr. Shukla Banerjee is HOD in English Department, Government Nagarjuna PG College of Science, Raipur. She is one of the senior faculties in the college and also the most loved teacher. 20 scholars completed their PhD under her supervision. Dr. Banerjee will share some of her experiences. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta. A very good afternoon to everyone. A bright sunny morning, but here we are. We have gathered here. I am unable to express my feelings because, JB sir was a different personality for me. His corporeal frame is not here on this earth, but what he has contributed to his field and what he has given us cannot be counted. He was a person who transcended everyone in greatness. Whenever I cross Rajkumar College, I feel that his name is reverberating everywhere, as if each and every plant, each and every tree, and each and every flower is missing him. We all miss him. Uncountable memories are there, stored in our heart, locked in our heart. He always stood by me whenever I needed him. And he will be venerated throughout generations. We all venerate him. He will be revered throughout generations. We all revere him, respect him, miss him. And what I can say, that he is seeing from above and saying, Didi, मैं यही हूं. मैं कहीं नहीं गया. My tribute to Dr. Jb Singh. I will just play this song.
I think the volume is not there, ma'am. Will you please increase the volume?
Can you hear me?
We can't hear the song, ma'am. Yeah, it's audible now.
The song is Rahe Na Rahe Hum. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Over to Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am. All of us had tears in our eyes when we were listening to you. It was not only you who was crying, but each and every individual who knew him, who had been associated with him, must be having tears in his eyes. Another eminent personality we have with us is Mrs. Chitrangi Iyer.
नहीं सुनाई दिया.
As Mrs. Chitrangi Iyer has worked as PGT and then HOD in English in Rajkumar College, Raipur, and also a principal of Royal Kids Convent, Rajnandgaon, she shared with him a professional relationship. Mrs. Iyer is a grounded administrator with lofty ideas. She is the principal of Little Word School, Jabalpur. May I request ma'am to share her views. Over to you, ma'am.
Please unmute.
Good afternoon, everybody. The dignitaries present here. You took me down the memory lane, Shukla ma'am, Savita ma'am, Sunaina ma'am, everybody, Shilpi ma'am. It was a pleasure to hear you. And it takes me back into 1985 when I first met Dr. Jb Singh. It was on a cricket field. My husband was a participant in that game, and they were both playing cricket. And I was watching him from far. And out of all those 30 players who were on the field, including the extras, this gentleman looked so humble, so modest. Even he went after the match and he congratulated all the opponents for playing so well. And he literally brought the ground to life. It was such a lifeless match. And he brought it to life. So I asked my husband, who is this guy who's so humble and so playing so well, but so grounded? Then he shared with me that he's a man from royal family and his bursar in Rajkumar College, Raipur. He's a good colleague of mine who plays cricket. That's how I first met him, my first impression. The second impression came when I went to Rajkumar Royal Kids Convent's annual function. My daughter was incidentally studying in this Royal Kids Convent, and he was a chairperson. And when we spoke, he said, ma'am, would you like to join us? I said, no, I have no future in teaching. I look elsewhere for that. So he said, I want to open a school in Rajnandgaon. I said, why in Rajnandgaon? He says, I'm from a privileged class. I get an opportunity to study in Rajkumar College and teach there. But what about the people of Rajnandgaon? They cannot all afford to go to public school. So my dream is to bring that holistic education to Rajnandgaon. So would you like to be a part of this journey? I said, the idea was wonderful. I was totally bowled by his great ideas and so humble. So he said, would you like to join me? I said, okay, for some time, I would like to help you out. And I joined Royal Kids Convent, Rajnandgaon, as the principal. Then we had 3 more branches. Thereafter, I came to Raipur. He quickly brought me to Rajkumar College as well. Whenever there was an opportunity, he got hold of me. When I reached there, I realized that he was into every part, whether it was academics or it was sports, whether we were going on tours or we are having inter-school activities or it was an IPSC meet. JB Singh was everywhere. I decided to learn from him. In fact, he was unconsciously grooming me in different areas. When it was academics, he used to give me an extra class to teach. You're teaching 10A, okay, take 10B as well. Teach both the sections together. I'm going out for a meeting, you take both the classes. I realized that he was grooming me for a bigger challenge. Whether it was badminton, one fine day he came from IPSC meet and he said, Mrs. Iyer, we have taken national IPSC meet. I said, sir, we do not have a team and we do not have a hall. He said, okay, let's make one. We have 2 months. And he would roll up his sleeves and help us. And even the painting of the hall was done by him. Of course, it was symbolic. And naturally, all students and teachers, including Savita ma'am and kids, everybody joined in and we painted the hall and got it ready for the meet. He used to take rounds in the mess to see that the food was served on time and it was well cooked, and he would join the children. The success of that person's leadership was because he was joining children at that level. So when children were pulled up in the principal's office, they never minded because he had joined them in the kitchen, he had joined them in the mess and in the football field. So I got some lessons of what I'm principal now, whatever success I've garnered, it is because I could take the tips from his principalship. He had rapport with the servants and their children. If there was a wedding in the family of a chowkidar or a game schoolie, he would gladly sit on the ground and have food with them. He was so humble. He did not have any airs that I am the principal. If somebody went to him that he's having some problem, he'll say, paise ki koi problem to nahi hai. And he would offer financial assistance. He never expected that person will return the money or not return. So selfless, so dedicated to the cause of mankind. Bas program badhiya hona chahiye, shaadi badhiya karo bacche ki. And he would ask, he would remember everybody's names. I was surprised when he would sometimes visit my home and there was a servant living next by in the games coolie quarter. He would call up and ask, how is your son doing? Has he cleared his exam? Is he playing or not? He remembered every small detail. So I was wondering, in spite of all that big responsibility he carries on his shoulders, how does he remember the names of all servants, their families, their children, the staff members, the condition where they are studying? It was huge exercise. I learned a lot by just being associated with him. The IPSC meet, we went to Gangtok to play. I carried the school team along with me. Savita ma'am came, sir came, family came. There was a landslide on the way. We were stranded. And this gentleman did not take a taxi and move away. He stood vigilant over there. He ensured that there was no traffic problem. We got food, we got water. He accommodated us, and the next bus we took to Gangtok. It was wonderful. He could have pulled his strings and, he knew Mr. Raman Singh and he knew so many people. He could have had whole, army of servants at his disposal. But he never misused it. He never abused it. So that's what all I learned when I became the principal. I got an opportunity to go to Birla School. I was very hesitant, but he made me strong. He said, no, this is a challenge and you're a sports person. Why can you not take a challenge? If you're stranded somewhere, just pick a call, make a call to me and I will help you out. But you have to take this challenge. It will make me feel so proud that one of my teachers is heading a Birla school. And I really got energy and, encouragement from that. And I decided to participate in that. And I took over for 2 years. It was a very good opportunity. And Maji also visited me there. I was so happy. She came to see me how I was doing in Raniket. It was a splendid surprise. I was really overwhelmed. So the whole family, I'm sure that this kind of beautiful qualities that I'm counting about Mr. J.B. Singh has been inherited by his grounded parents. My pranam to both of them, Papaji and Maji. They have always served. They have always helped people. They never were swollen-headed. There was never too. They took pride in children's accomplishment. Even the girls in the family were, given responsibilities to pursue their own career. And they were encouraged so well. All the relatives and cousins and friends and workers, everybody. So he touched so many lives which came in his way. If there was a sad occasion, he would run there. He would give his vehicle and money and people and send them people over there. They'd come on, help them. And because of that, today, what success I have in Little World, last 12 years, I'm heading that school. We are leading in Jabalpur with wonderful results and doing extremely well. It is partly or mostly because of what teachings Mr. J.B. Singh has given me. I always think that, how he followed it, how he conducted himself, how he helped others, how he guided others. And it is now my duty to pass on the baton to the others. And now I've also started grooming other teachers to become future principals of different schools. And 3 of them have already become. So I'm carrying the legacy that has been given by Mr. J.B. Singh. And I really owe my whole entire life and success and everything that I am today to Mr. J.B. Singh. Had he not me propelled on the path of teaching, probably I would have never come. But then he was a visionary. He knew what is in me, which I did not know myself. And he recognized that and exploited that potential to the full effect. And I'm so happy that I followed his path. Thank you so much to be a part, for giving me an opportunity, ELT, to be a part of this memorial lecture. If I've gone beyond my time limit that was given to me, please grant me that opportunity. Shweta ma'am, over to you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Also, we have with us Mr. Amit Jha. He is alumni of Royal Kids Convent, a school set up by JB Sir in Rajanandgaon in 1984. Mr. Amit Jha is from the first batch, 1997. Based in United States, Mr. Jha works with Amazon Web Services, US at a very prestigious designation. His love for JB Sir can be felt from the fact that he is going to connect us all the way from US. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone. Good afternoon. I feel like I'm privileged enough to be in this group. Here's the thing, right? We discussed about dream child as a school, dream grandchild, right? So you have like 1,500 plus army of alumni, right? So I am one of the product of that school. I'm just going to recollect some of my interactions with JB Sir. The very first interaction I had, I was actually a little taken aback. I was a little bit introvert, so I shied myself. I was uncomfortable to speak in front of him because the presence, the magnanimous, his voice and the command, the confidence, it just bowled me. And I always thought, like, what would it be that you can get that level of confidence? The next meeting I had in a couple of years again, at that time, I was a little bit more confident. So I went and I spoke to him, and then he said, okay, tell me what you have studied. I said, I studied inertia. I said, okay, tell me what it is. I said, the property of an object with which is in state of rest or motion, it's called inertia. He said, okay, what else have you studied? I'm like, I studied science. Okay, tell me something about it. Or cinema TV videos of like a bomb forward. So he understood one problem there, that I was cramming things and I was actually not understanding things. He said, Amit, we have a problem here. What's the problem? You got to understand things. You are just memorizing. Education is not about merely repetition of the facts that you have memorized. It's more important to understand, because what you have to do is you have to think. And that just, what do you call, aha moment in life? That's like one of my aha moment in life. Like, you have to just understand things and not just cram and repeat, because memorization can get you to a certain level, but understanding can take you to way, way further. That's one example. And he had a knack of ability to see where he can help. He could give me connect with this person, connect with the other person. In my career, like around 2012, 2013, I happened to meet him. And I explained him, like, here is how the IT career works. You learn something, you do something in it, but then there is a new technology that you learn. He says, Amit, that's the beauty, right? You are always looking to getting yourself uncomfortable. So you're not banking on the skills that you're building. You're actually building new skills. You should master this, because these days the best skill is to have ability to learn. So learning to learn is the biggest skill than having some particular skill. You can see, like, different point. He has such, like, he's pretty much like what you call a master in the education field. He could see a person, he could tell what are the key attributes there, give them guidance, like simple things. In Rajnandgaon, I mean, during late 80s and 90s, there was not many English schools. RKC came in and we started learning, and he got Jila Granthalaya to get English papers. He started the single word challenge, learn each one word a day. Very simple things. But now I see the value of it, right? I mean, I could never think of a person studying in Rajnandgaon and being able to compete and being able to work hand in hand with Stanford and the different biggest institutes of the world, like coming from there. So all credit building, it's not the companies that I work, it's primarily RKC is the brand. RKC is the brand that has built me. That foundation that you get in the school, and with teachers like Iyer madam, and she was my principal, lucky enough to be connected with her, and the different teachers with the guidance of JB sir. There are so many students. So I would say that it's not just me. There are many Amits, and there are many students like me which JB sir has actually built and touched their lives significantly. And we have the alumni grip. There is not a single day where JB sir, Papaji is not thanked. There's so many lives he has influenced. JB sir, wherever you are, we love you. I feel like he's always there. Like, if there is an issue, I think of JB sir, how would you solve it? Because the confidence with which he approached the problem, he's like, can you do something about it? If you can't do something about it, forget it. If you can do it, do it. So really, this is an amazing opportunity. Thank you for this. I will always cherish JB sir in my life. And I don't want to be in between the presentation. So over to you, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, sir. And now arrives the most awaited moment of the session. We have amongst us the multi-dimensional personality, Dr. Dinesh Nair, as the key speaker. Sir, we are extremely honored to have you with us. I will request Dr. Shashank Gupta to introduce Dr. Nair. Dr. Shashank Gupta, Assistant Professor, Government J. Yoganandam, Chhattisgarh College, Raipur. With over 13 years of teaching experience, he is supervising 3 research candidates. He is the Secretary of ELT Raipur Chapter. Over to you, Shashank, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the opportunity. It is my proud privilege to introduce Dr. Dinesh Nair, Associate Professor, VG Vazir College, Mumbai. Sir, I will try to encapsulate the highlights of your esteemed achievement with your kind permission, sir. Dr. Dinesh Nair is a research supervisor since 2012, and he has been teaching at the undergraduate and postgraduate level for 28 years and has guided 23 students for their MPhil degrees. 6 scholars are working with him for their doctoral degrees, and 5 have been awarded PhD. He has published 8 books and written more than 30 articles, which is published in various national and international reputed journals. World War I's Centenary Hindsights is his recent book. He has also co-authored and edited 3 books for the University of Mumbai: Linguistics and Stylistics, Analysis of Texts, Translation Studies, and Literary Theory. His areas of publication is marginality and literature, cultural negotiation, femininities in diaspora, ethnicity in diaspora, culinary politics, relational identity, new historicism, and so on. He has written his research papers on Amitav Ghosh Alice Walker, Angela Carter, Kamala Das, Shashi Deshpande, Arvind Adika, and G.V. Desani. He is also engaged in academic extension programs, and he has been teaching in Indira Gandhi National Open University, taking classes of remedial English proficiency courses, soft skill training, personality development programs, corporate training, and mass media courses, and so on. He has presented 22 research papers in various international, national, and state level programs. Topics of paper presentations were mother-daughter matrix, South Asian diaspora, mother archetypes, structuration theory, post-colonial cartography, media rhetoric, and higher education. He has been engaged in curriculum development of various governments and private universities and autonomous institutions. Dr. Dinesh has been resource person for panel discussion at American Center, international conferences, national seminar, UNESCO, and Kendriya Vidyalaya also. Some of the topics for keynote addresses and plenary talks were gastrodynamics, ecology and literature, applied literary theory, American culture, language teaching, tribal in Indian fiction, eco-criticism, new millennium fiction, cultural capital. He has so many laurels and awards to his credit, and his list of academic achievement is so long that it is almost impossible for me to encompass it in a given time frame. Therefore, without delay, I invite Dr. Dinesh Nair, and most humbly, I request him to take over the dais. Over to you, Nair sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Shashank Gupta, for an ultra generous introduction. I must also put on record my highest sense of gratitude for Dr. Savita Singh, who I think in a year and a half or so has become a very thick friend of mine, and we have had many academic exchanges, and I enjoyed all her venues and all her gatherings because they were all intellectually very, very stimulating, be it a refresher course or even a memorial lecture like this. I'm also mindful of the presence of great academicians, scholars, research guides, the office bearers and the members of ELT. A word about ELT. ELT is a very, very fruitful engagement of English teachers across the nation and even across various nations. It has generated a lot many meaningful interfaces involving scholars and interdisciplinary scholarship. And I'm also mindful of the kind of responsibility that I'm shouldering when I'm trying to deliver a session, that to a memorial lecture based on an illustrious career of a man who was greatly loved and respected by many people, not just in Raipur, but across many states, Dr. Jb Singh. And I'll try to do my justice on both the accounts, try and engage the ELT members, and I'll also try to engage the great fandom that I could find of Dr. Jb Singh, because I'm sure from all the tributes I've understood that he could be nothing less than a visionary and a great academician, and I believe a great humanitarian soul. We need such people all around the country to elevate and to uplift the academic scenario as well as academic institutions. And I'm sure his philosophy, his vision would inspire and motivate many of us. And I also pay my very humble tribute to him. Now, coming to what I intend to do, because I'm also very mindful of the highly resonating space that I'm occupying now in the capacity of a keynote speaker, because the space in the Esther years being occupied by great scholars and literary figures, including Mahesh Dattani and others. I'll try to do justice with my humble scholarship and my humble addition to the body of knowledge, which I felt will be interesting for all teachers, not necessarily English teachers, all teachers. It could also interest the science teachers. I think some of my colleagues who are science teachers they also had promised that they would be joining the session. So I'll try to cater for both the groups. And I also must put on record the presence of my own mentor and my guide, Dr. Rambao Badode, who was the professor and head of Department of English, University of Mumbai. And he had been a great banyan tree for myself, using my own metaphor. So that was something that really gave me a lot of support and motivation in my career. So I'll try to share my screen first, and then start with that. Please let me know once the screen is visible. Is it visible now? Okay. So, Savita madam, if I mistake not, I get about an hour of my...
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, because
Yes,
that is
sir. Yes,
the
sir.
time that
Yes.
I'm looking at. All right.
Yes.
So the discourse that I'm trying to... Correct. Am I audible also?
Yes, you're very clear, sir. Very clear, and the screen is visible. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. The discourse that I'm trying to unpack today is titled Botanical Imagination, Vegetal Bodies in Poetry. So I'll engage a little bit with that. Botanical imagination is not a very conventional romantic imagination about nature, or the way we call in English literature, conventional pathetic fallacy, that is transferring human emotions onto plants. My project is a little deeper. It is, on one hand, it is rooted somewhere in botany and botanical science, and on the other hand, it is also rooted in culture studies and then various aspects of culture, poetry, and so on. Maybe one could place this under the larger ambit of eco-criticism, because I'll also be touching upon various aspects of ecology in literature and particularly in poetry. And I'll come to the terms a little later, and straight away I move into what I want to discuss. The term phyto relates to plants. So I believe that we have had in English literature and literature in English translation and so on, we have had a great legacy of people and scholars and philosophers thinking very seriously about plants and not just exoticizing them or romanticizing them. Now, one of them that comes to my mind most immediately is this great poet, Paul Valery. So I'll read out from that one of his statements that that this great essayist, poet, and philosopher had made once. So this is what he says in the context of plants, and also understanding time differently from the perspective of plants. What else than the living organism allows one to see and sense true time? The issue here is about what is time and what is true time, whether human perception of time is correct or whether the perception of time that is generally made by other creatures could also be valid. For a plant, a form is equivalent to an age. Form is linked to size. Time is inextricably and correlatively tied to its life. A year is a node. Node is that part of a branch from which new leaves sprout. So generally, it is swollen, and you can understand. You can feel the node in a branch. So a year is a node, a layer, a body separated from its surroundings, and annexed, added on to, raised, directed, appointed, placed, built upon. So here is Valery, a great French symbolist, philosopher, compelling us to look at time from a very different perspective, to look at a tree or a plant and understand how time unfolds in the life of a plant or even a tree. Now, I'll connect this to my title, Botanical Imagination. So this is largely about how poets, novelists, and even writers have been extensively writing about the lives of plants. And I'm just not interested in how various images are evoked by the writers, but I'm more interested in how people have been writing about the lives of plants. So there is a term, phytography. I'll come to that a little later. Phytography. Phytography is like biography. If biography is about human lives, phytography is about the text, all the texts which are written about the lives of plants. So, as a kind of a departure from conventional study of literature, I'm proposing this idea of phytography, looking into the lives of plants which are written by many writers. And there are two names that I'll be evoking throughout my presentation. Of course, this entire talk is inspired by a great writer of the name John Charles Ryan, who teaches at the Southern Cross University in Australia, Southern Cross University, who's been in many ways the father of what I would say that phytocriticism, that is a branch of literary criticism that combines the interest and the stakeholding of plants and literature. Maybe an extension, one could consider that as an extension of eco-criticism. There are two seminal works written by Ryan. One is Language of Plants, wherein he tries to unfold how plants communicate and how we can understand the communication of plants. And two, there is another brilliant book-long study of the title, Plants in Contemporary Poetry, Eco-Criticism and Botanical Imagination. If you look at the paradigm, which is very similar to Environmental Imagination, the whole wonderful text that was written by Lawrence Buell. So he considers this maybe as an extension of that. And also another writer that I was talking about is Michael Marder, who is again a non-fiction writer, and who talks about the philosophy of plants, and then compels us to read and to maybe revise the human approach to philosophy. So I'll come to that just a little later. So another book which again I could bring into perspective is of the title again by Charles Ryan, is of the title The Mind of Plants. The Mind of Plants, Narratives of Vegetal Intelligence. Vegetal Intelligence. So whether plants also have their intelligence. Now, a word that I would try to bring in at this point is plant blindness. Plant blindness. Plant blindness is one of the prejudices that we human beings have. This is very similar to speciesism, ageism, sexism, and so on. So plant blindness is our disregard or lack of interest in plants, or rather dumping and classifying plants as passive and having no sense of their own. So what I'm trying to interrogate throughout my session is this plant blindness, and to try and understand the legacy of the writers who have tried to invert or to challenge this plant blindness. So plant blindness, I repeat, is a prejudice like speciesism, the way we generally treat animals as lesser creatures. We very often treat even plants as lesser creatures, and more so because at least plants have the the animals have creature status, whereas plants don't even have the creature status because they don't move. But I'll try to interrogate some of these conventional notions by and by. Let me also see how plants have inspired, and I'm extremely mindful of the space that I'm occupying, particularly in India. We respect a whole lot of plants. We pay tribute, we worship Tulsi, Bale, banyan tree, peepal tree, and plants have also been very influential in Indian history, and at least adversely, if you look at there are some of these habit-forming plants like cannabis and poppy. We have one whole novel. In fact, two novels I can talk about, two novels written on opium and opium trade. One is The Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh, and Kunal Basu has written another novel of the title Opium Clerk. So both of them are in the setting of the transnational politics and the difficulties and leading up to the opium war, and how a plant product could really create international confusion. So that's where the plants are. I would like to evoke another art form, because I go a little non-literary to begin with, because these are easily recognizable art forms where you find the vegetal motifs. One of that is this great art form called, that art form called Arabesque. Arabesque is generally a form of decoration that one finds involving many foliage and tendrils. Tendrils are those spring-like attachments that you have in creepers. So there are those support mechanisms that those creepers have. So you find these intricate designs of foliage and tendrils, particularly in Arabesque, that too the Islamic art based on this nature. So you find this engraved in various surfaces, not necessarily always in architecture, but we will find we find these decorative traditions in a great deal of Islamic art, including what is rendered on walls, furniture, metalwork, and even pottery. So these are common designs. We can see those pictures on the right side. At a symbolic level, what we find in this Arabesque art is the recollection of the feminine principle as the life-giving nature, and the vegetal motifs, the patterns that one finds. So there is a kind of feminization of art and architecture with the help of these plants and the plant motifs. Arabesque could also be traced in Egypt, where you find one on the bottom right-hand side is something which is carved out of high ivory plaque, which was made as early as 11th and 12th century in Egypt. We find a lot of hunters involved in activities, but as a backdrop to their drama and activity, we find the vegetal motifs here. So my point is that the vegetal motifs are not merely the backdrop in art. We will come to know about how vegetal motifs take the center stage in poetry, particularly in certain types of poetry. But at the same time, I must also give a word of caution, that I'm not trying to romanticize plants, but I'm trying to take a more scientific approach to the plants in literature. Okay, there are a few terms which have been inaugurated by the works of writers such as John Ryan, and they have become now popular in a lot of interdisciplinary studies. And one of them is the term HPS, or what we call human plant studies. It's an emerging interdisciplinary area. It studies plants, and to see how these plants act upon humans. And then in the process, it tries to co-generate, how plants and human beings co-generate the milieus of sustenance, and places in which our everyday lives run their courses. Like when we have our life and when we run the courses of our own life, we often come across the effect and influence of plants. And I'll come to all of that just a little later. And the second term that I need to talk about is this critical plant studies. There is something called plant studies, but I'm more interested in plant studies is more science-based, but whereas critical plant studies is something which is more based on interdisciplinary dialogue. It tries to initiate an interdisciplinary dialogue whereby philosophy, literature would learn to think about, to imagine and to describe vegetal life with critical awareness. So we have a lot of these forerunners in that. Names like Anthony Boutard, Betty Fussell, Matthew Hall. Matthew Hall has written a very interesting text of the title Plants as Persons, a Philosophical Botany. So he adds an element of philosophy to botany, and he also adds the element of personhood and identity to plants in that very interesting study. And I was already talking about Michael Marder. Michael Marder published this very, very interesting book, Plant Thinking, a Philosophy of Vegetable Life, published in 2013. Now, much of these developments have happened in the 21st century, a good 20 years later than animal studies and critical animal studies. It came much later than the philosophers, thinkers, and the critical theory taking interest in the lives of plants. So if you look at Richard Ryder and Joan Donaire and others who developed a comprehensive animal studies, critical animal studies template in the starting from 1970s. This happened a good 20 years later. Human interest, or rather the academic interest in the agential and personhood of plants happened much later. And another work is by Michael Pollen, Pollan, Michael Pollen. He wrote a very interesting text of the title, The Botany of Desire. The Botany of Desire, which has a subheading also. Phytography is all about human writings about plant lives and the possibility whether plants communicate with human beings about their own lives. Do they communicate something with us about their own lives? So this touches upon many other factors which long back even our own great J.C. Bose had once spoken about. So it is about the vegetal intelligence, vegetal behavior, plant corporeality, that is the body of the plant. And I'm more interested, as in my title, I'm trying to locate the body of the plant, not just the abstract, exoticized references to plants, but the body of the plants in literature and particularly in poetry, corporeality of the plant and the temporality of plant, whether plants have their own time. Do they understand time in a different way? And if so, what is that? I'll come to that debate also just a little later. So phytography is all about narrating. We understand at this point that like human beings, plants too have a complex world in which they live and die. So phytography is largely about narrating the complex world of plants, and it advocates new fresh possibilities for human flora relation, human-flora relation, just like human-animal relation. So there are many instances. For example, one of the novels that comes to my mind, maybe some of you must have read, is written by an Indo-Caribbean writer of the name Unia Kempadu. Unia Kempadu has written a novel of the title Buxton Spice. Buxton Spice. It's based in Guyana. It's all about the coming of age of a girl and her imagined conversation with the tree. Most of the narrative is propelled by this tree of the name Buxton Spice. So it gives a very different perspective on human concerns for a very long time, and hence it understands more about even human nature. There is also, along with this, I need to talk about this idea of poetics. Arboreal is a term that is related to tree. So, tree art, and how do we understand that? So it's all about the representation of botanical lives, like we have some debates about the representation of animal lives. So there is a great German botanist of the name Peter Wolleben. He was a German botanist and a forester. He had written a very, very significant text about the trees of the title, The Hidden Life of Trees. The Hidden Life of Trees. What they feel, how they communicate. That's the whole title. The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel, how they communicate. And a kind of a reference to this is that one could even feel the human tendency to bring trees into literary discourse or even religious discourse, even in some of the earliest texts. And I'll just evoke one instance, the book of Genesis in Bible, in which we are told about the life. There are two trees which are adjacent, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. And we know how Eve was tempted, and later Adam was also tempted by the fruit. And much later reference could be about, I would say, Tagore, and I deliberately didn't want to bring a lot more familiar text. Tagore's whole idea of Aranya Sanskriti that he talks about, Aranya Sanskriti, is about understanding human condition through forest. He says, if you enter a forest, you will witness the cycle of death and regeneration with the fallen leaves, the seasonal changes of the plants and trees. We understand this intricate cycle of life and death. That is a big philosophy that we take away when we go to a forest. And he also says that in a forest, there is a variety. We find a kind of maddening variety of plants, trees, vegetation, and so on. And there, at times, their symbiosis and also their coexistence, which would also give a better picture of human democracy that he talks about, multiculturalism and democracy that he talks about. And he uses a term, Aranya Sanskriti. Very interesting context here. But at the same time, I must also say that plants are not just poetic. Plants are also political. So I'll also be interested in the plant politics. The plant politics is not the politics of the plant. It is the human ideology about plants. Or rather, with what ideology we plant trees. Or what is our approach in bringing certain trees. And this became very, very significant debate in colonial and post-colonial context. I'll just evoke one and then make you understand. There is an idea called botanical imperialism. Botanical imperialism is, there are two implications. How plants, seeds, and other such resources have been appropriated by the colonizers, taken away, trafficked, and appropriated by the Westerners and the colonizers. The other perspective is all about how plants have been used as an instrument of imperialism. I'll give you one example of this, and then maybe we will understand the significance of plant politics. And if you happen to read the cultural history or even some of the novels of the Caribbeans, there's a very interesting tree that comes up, and I have mentioned this in another discourse some time back. There is a tree of the name breadfruit tree. Breadfruit tree. Breadfruit tree is not a native of the Caribbean islands. It was brought in as a substitute to food. So it was brought in as early as 1793 by Captain William Bligh, who was overseeing the workers, particularly the slaves who were brought from Africa and the indentured laborers also. So that the Britishers, the colonizers, had a crisis that the workers had tremendous appetite, insatiable appetite, and they were feeling that they should economize the consumption of food, or rather they should find a cheap substitute. So they found giving them grains would be more expensive, and this Bligh started working on that, and he went to many places and brought in this plant. So it's a big fruit which can be used in many dishes and could be boiled and also could be eaten. And he also found out later, it was first, I think it was brought to St. Vincent, and from there to other Caribbean locations as well. Now, what one finds here is there is a kind of a resistance when we read something about the breadfruit by an Afro-Caribbean writer or an Indo-Caribbean writer, because they feel that this cheap food was imposed upon them, and they cannot relate to a breadfruit tree. They have a revulsion. They still associate the breadfruit tree with an imperial strategy. So you find that in the novels of, I think, Edwidge Danticat, poems, many of the poems which are written about by the Afro-Caribbean or even Indo-Caribbean writers about the breadfruit tree. So this is what I mean by botanical imperialism or the politics of plant. And then the next term that I also need to look at is phytocriticism. I have already mentioned that it's the study of plants in literary texts. Phytocriticism, like ecocriticism, it indicates the presence, significance, representation of plants in literary text. So it means reading of a literary text, be it a poem or a novel, reading of this literary text through the plant-focused lens. Ecocriticism uses the environment-focused lens, and here we narrow it down further with the plant-focused lens. All right. My key term obviously is vegetal. So I'm trying to give some dictionary definitions of the same also. And what does it mean? Vegetal in English is an adjective, which means relating to plants. So we can have a lot of expressions with that, with these instances like a vegetal aroma, vegetal cells related to plants. And it also is defined in another dictionary as of relating to or characteristic of vegetables or plant life. Features which are very characteristic of plant life. And also another level of pertaining to or designating that class of vital phenomena such as digestion, absorption, assimilation, secretion, excretion, circulation, generation, etc., which are common to plants, and in distinction from the sensation and volition. Volition is all about the ability to have emotions, ability to respond to emotional situations, and so on, which are supposed to be the attribute of human beings and some of the animals, which are peculiar to animals. So we generally make this kind of a distinction and taxonomy based on this distinction between, plants are generally considered insensate and without volition. And also, vegetal refers to many of these stylized forms, designs and patterns and motifs that you find in painting and architecture. So that this explains largely the key term. And I'll also delve a little bit about Indian botanical art. Botanical art is a little paradoxical, but then it is a fact. There have been plenty of renderings in the form of painting of Indian plants. And ironically, much of that today can be retrieved in England. I'll talk about that also. What one finds here is that's a very interesting illustrated book by Martin Rix. And Martin Rix is a British botanist. What I'm trying to say or make a point here is there have been many scientists, botanists who have also been artists. So art and science are not adversaries. The history of science has been largely influenced by art, particularly the history of botany. So we have a very interesting book of this title, Indian Botanical Art, an Illustrated History by Martin Rix. Martin Rix, incidentally, is a British botanist and a writer. He also is a good writer. It was published as late as 2021 by the Kiev Publishing at the Kiev University in England. And what the book focuses is on the with illustration and description, the striking botanical art of Indian origin, spanning, of course, it could have been a colonial project, spanning a period of 300 years, and particularly focusing on the 18th and 19th century painters, Indian painters of Indian origin, but the paintings are currently now in Kiev Botanical Garden. Incidentally, the Royal Botanic Garden in Kiev is one of the largest botanical gardens, and which has the largest collection of rare seeds also. So it's a part of that project. The paintings are also kept there. So these paintings are mostly drawn from the original works held in the collection at the Royal Botanic Garden. They form the original collection. And these paintings mostly showcase, this is very interesting fact. This is the crux of my argument is that these paintings are not just romantic rendering of these plants and flowers, but they showcase the wealth of Indian subcontinent flora, which was very alien to the British for a very long time. And these paintings render that richness. And a variety of these artworks commissioned from mostly unknown Indian artists. You may not even know these painters and their names, but their paintings exist, indicating how, my point here is how botany and collection of samples and herbarium have been immensely helped by artists. Some of them remained relatively unknown also. So the history building or the specimen building in botany has been helped immensely by the paintings. And further, these paintings are, as I told you, not just romantic rendering of plants, but these are documents of plants of their economic, ornamental, and cultural importance. I've been already talking about plants have been used as ornament. Even today, when you buy a new vehicle, or maybe at the time of wedding, we find the ornamental use of flowers and plants. There is also plant economy. That anyway, I will not get deeper into that. But then, in an agrarian society, we know how plant is a part of the economy altogether. Then the cultural importance also of the plants, which I was already talking about at the beginning. What is then this vegetal literature project that I'm talking about? The Vegetal Literature Project is a very inclusive. It's an inclusive dragnet in which we will consider the rendering, the appearance, and the representation of anything from a sapling to the ginormous tree. It's a portmanteau word, gigantic and enormous. So all of them become a part of this project when we read critically literature rendering plants and vegetal life. And we also consider we are not happy with the bark and the branches of the tree. We propose to go deeper into the heartwoods. And what is incidentally the heartwood? Heartwood is the dense interior part of a tree trunk, which yields the hardest timber. So we are considering the possibility of drilling deeper into the heartwoods of dense secrets. Of course, I'm using metaphors very purposefully. So it is also an attempt to go far, far beyond the mere elementary green gyan, which you find in the first phase of Phytocriticism, something more than that. And it would also consider poems, novels, and other narratives as the records of memory creepers. Again, a metaphor. And part of my discourse is all about the metaphoricity of plants. Plants are naturally given for this possibility, creating a lot of metaphors. And we also, a novel or a poem which has the vegetal body is an attempt on the part of the writer to initiate the readers into this imaginative hugging of familiar and even strange trees. Just a word about hugging a tree as well. It is said, of somewhere I read, that it is very rich of oxytocin, which is a hormone responsible for calmness and emotional bonding. So trees substitute even human partners, it seems. So that's where my project takes a little more significance with this imaginative hugging of trees. All right. Even before delving deeper into the literary aspect of plants and trees, we need to consider how much of vegetal metaphors are a part of our everyday language. In fact, in English and in so many Indian languages, we have many vegetal metaphors which have become a part of the common parlance. In English, for instance, we have the seed of an idea we have seed capital, we have seed money. And even NAC speaks, of this seed money and seed capital and so on. So seeds are often seen as things of potential, small ideas, small efforts, which will grow into big things. So taking off from that point, we have this very famous statement by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American transcendentalist, who had once stated famously, the creation of 1,000 forests in one acorn. So acorn is the fruit of oak tree. So this is taken from his very famous work, Inspirational Notebook for Nature Lovers. Inspirational Notebook for Nature Lovers. So apart from the seed, of course, I don't have to explain that what he means by creation of 1,000 forests in one acorn, one fruit. That's a seed-based metaphor. So what I'm also interested is this metaphoricity of seeds, roots, stems, branches, and so on. Then, coming to roots, we talk about setting down roots. We go back to our roots. We also see the root of our problems. And we also have deep-rooted beliefs. And we often talk about grounding ourselves, which is one of the functions of the plant's root. Then comes stem. Now we have things stemming from something. We branch out and we branch off. We have branches of shops, branches of families, and branches of so many of our endeavors. So I'm reminded of W.B. Yeats when he said, if what I say resonates with you, it is merely because we are both branches on the same tree. I think that branching exists even in this discourse when I'm communicating to you. That if it makes sense, it is also because we are all branches of one same tree. Now coming to one of the issues that I was talking about, the basic premise that I opened as plant blindness, which can also be called vegetal neglect. And what is vegetal neglect? Vegetal neglect is a characterization of photosynthetic life. Now all plants photosynthesize. So the life that is dependent on sunlight and carbon dioxide is considered as a life that is dull, insensate, and spatially fixed, rooted at one place. And since the plant apparently doesn't move, we feel that it is lesser life. But as a kind of counter argument to that, we have this idea of what is called nastic movement. Nastic is any motion, any movement related to plants, which may be largely because of some external factors, wind, temperature, and so on, sunlight, and so on. Plants do move, and that is the argument. And Ryan Charles vehemently argues that certain plants are capable of moving, responding also. All too familiar example of touch me not. I'm leaving that. But he talks about the projectile mechanism of some plants. Some plants can throw things. Can you imagine? Can disperse and throw things. One of the examples is that of a mulberry, white mulberry, which you find in China, some parts of India, in the Western world also. The pollen expulsion, the pollen grains are, dispersed by this white mulberry in a kind of an explosion and projectile movement, which has been described as the fastest recorded biological motion, faster than cheetah, which is approximately 537 miles per hour. Now, this is something similar to a jet propulsion. So that is a speed of something like a white mulberry, very unassuming plant, but then it is capable of this movement. How do we understand this movement? Of course, it is a non-muscular movement. it is called a non-muscular hydraulic propulsion within the plant, and which is moderated by the internal water conveyance. So with the hydraulic water conveyance system, the plant is able to expel some amount of pollen at a speed of 537 miles per hour. Another idea is that do plants think and do they have a brain? There is an argument that the concept of this metaphor, beautiful metaphor, root brain. Root is a brain for a plant. The primary root, the sturdy, long, which goes very deep into the soil of a plant, is analogous to the animal brain, and it often mediates the processing of sensory information within the plant. The plant is able to, tree or a plant is able to sense a lot of things through the primary root. Now we have other roots also, radical roots, root tubers, and some of them develop into vegetables like potatoes, radish, and so on, which we consume later. So primary root is the first plant organ also, the very first plant organ, which appears when the seed germinates, and it anchors the seedling to the ground, to the soil. Now, all these are ideas which were already there as early when we had Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose, our own biologist, botanist, physicist, plant physiologist, who was putting it vehemently across to people that plants have life. He was already talking about plant neurobiology long back, plant memory, plant nerve, and plants' response to heat, trauma, shock, toxins. We also know that when a plant is shifted from one place to another, it has a shock. Even common gardeners today talk about trauma and shock, plants' trauma and shock. That is their sensitivity to plants, and also a response to toxins. Okay, now here I come to a poem, rather a very unexpected poem by William Tye. William Tye was an Irish agricultural theorist in the 18th century. Now, this poem is not written by any of the great 18th century or 19th century poets, Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats. But of course, Tye was related to them in a different way. I'll come to that also. It's a very long poem on the rose. Interestingly, my point is, this is not a poem written by a poet, but this is a poem written by a botanist. And Tye, as a botanist, he did his study partly in Ireland, and later he got settled for a long time in Italy. But when he was in Italy, he was visited by Shelley and Byron, both the Shelleys, Mary Shelley and P.B. Shelley, along with Byron. And they've had very meaningful interactions. And this fellow had an interest, of course, he was interested in flowers. Apart from that, he was more interested in tubers and particularly potatoes. He collected potatoes from very different places. He was trying to prove something in that. Unfortunately, he couldn't do. Then he came out with an idea that all these potatoes are similar. Let's read this poem. It's not the complete poem, it's an extract from that poem, a very long poem written in 1808, early 19th century. Let's look at the poet in Tye. Let's also look at the botanist in Tye, and how this tension is resolved, or rather reflected in the poem. At every blast of a cloud of odorous flowers, immortal roses, which the smile divine of truth and constancy had taught to blow, such as o'er Psyche's bridal couch, the hours shed emulous. Emulous is seeking something that we seek to emulate. and made the ambrosial feast worthy of heaven. Now, these 5-6 lines are pretty much in the, either in the Hellenistic style or maybe you could say in the Romantic tradition. But after the pause, there is a dash, it changes. And look at that. It talks about this. But by no magic spells enslaved, efficient in its native strength. He's talking about the natural strength of that rose, maybe the natural property of the rose. For him, the rose is not just an aesthetic object. It is a herb for him. And here is the botanist coming out. And he says, the salutary herb. And what is salutary? Salutary is something which creates benefit for any aspect that creates benefit for others. So it is a salutary herb, suddenly, very useful, which has many properties and which heals according to him. And he says, the salutary herb shall oft renew the healthier action of the feeble frame. Here it becomes a remedy, it becomes something that is used. And then that follows a series of these words, which are largely scientific, used in medical science: astringent, cephalic, and febrifuge. Astringent is something which causes contraction of skin. So how the rose functions as an astringent comes up. Cephalic, which is used in normally in the context of childbirth. So it is a head first presentation of the fetus. Now look at from what it comes to what, that it is often useful for this cephalic situation. Febrifuge is a medicine to break fever. So he says that the rose is useful at all these. For this, the scientific herbalist, here he gradually moves into the zone of herbalist, a botanist, and he says, for this, the scientific herbalist shall rear the gallican. So for these purposes, for these medicinal purposes, a herbalist will grow a particular variety of rose, which is called gallican. Gallican may come this word Galicia rose. It's a French rose, which is supposed to be of high quality. Galicia rose. Nature twine her wilder bosoms through the straggling hedge. Straggling is, irregular growth, something, irregular growth of plants and herbs. So he's talking about how a rose can be largely useful as a medicinal plant. For me, this body of rose, vegetal body of rose, is quite different from the vegetal presence that Wordsworth, Shelley, or Keats would have done. And this kind of a poem is not merely useful for literary enthusiasts. This is a poem about very important herbalist information of early 19th century, which probably was not recorded in any other text. So here we have a poem which becomes a vital botanical text. So this is the point that I was trying to make. So our study has a typical agenda setting. The premise that we are building up is that plants are not only decorative or useful, but they can become cultural agents and poetic forces. Like what we have seen in the poem that we read. We also try to use plant agency and plant perspective to further the interdisciplinary exchange and collaboration in the budding field of plant studies and even more recent critical plant studies. It's an emerging field, as I told you, emerged in the 21st century. And it also enables us to rethink central concepts of environmental humanities, such as the Anthropocene of nature-culture divide by specifically looking at plants. We could even revise some of the tenets and practices of environmental humanities and eco-criticism using this model. What incidentally Anthropocene is the current contemporary geological age in which we are living. The period in which human intervention or human activity has adversely impacted climate and the environment. So we are already into this Anthropocene. Then we can also identify the plant politics of poets. One aspect of plant politics I explained in the context of the breadfruit. And every poet has a gender politics. Every poet has a plant politics also. How does the poet consider the plant? How does the poet render and represent the plant? Like animals would indicate the plant politics of the poet. So we have what is called plant politics, garden politics, and so on, including the seeds that you conserve, preserve. And also the very idea of what is a plant and what is a weed. That's also a kind of, we could consider that also as plant blindness. We classify them according to our utility. The rest of them are weeds. And plants also colonize. Remember, there are many parasites. There are many creepers. Hyacinth, for example, it colonizes a pond or a water body in no time. So look at that also. Then we also try to identify the discourse of flowers and plants. What is the language used while describing flowers and plants? And how do they make presence in various discourses, including language and literature? That is also our area of interest. Okay. 2. Build upon that, the idea of plant garden politics. We'll examine a little bit of this very popular American poet of late 19th century, Emily Dickinson. We'll try to examine the plant politics, how Emily Dickinson represents the plants and also how she uses plants to advance her own ideology, be it even the gender ideology. Interestingly, Emily Dickinson's father was interested in gardening. And in addition to that, they kept a herbarium. My friends from botany will understand it much better, but even otherwise, it's very simple. Herbarium is a collection of preserved plants. They are put under a press between papers and all. So she kept a herbarium, a collection of preserved plants, plant specimens, especially of rare plants. What one also finds in her is the 19th century interest in nature. That's a general romantic interest and transcendental interest in nature, which comes from the legacy of Whitman, Thoreau, Emerson, and so on. Then there is garden poetry, the whole tradition of middle class, upper middle class interest in gardening. Gardening was very fashionable at that time. And also the interest in exotic plants. Now, what I also find, we will be reading a smaller poem by Emily Dickinson. We also find Dickinson using her own gender ideology in inverting some of the traditional gendered structures in her poem with the help of plant metaphors. And this vegetal network gives a rich metaphoricity. What is metaphoricity? The ability to render itself into a metaphor. Something which has the ability to render itself into a metaphor. Plants have that more than probably anything else. Plants and trees have that. So I would invite you to read this small poem by Emily Dickinson, I Tend My Flowers for Thee. One might be carried away by the kind of exotic value she attaches to this poem, but we need to read it very closely. to understand what is happening here. This is as if it is written to the absent lover. So I read it. I tend my flowers for thee, bright absentee. The bright absentee is the Lord, the man, the lover. My fuchsia coral seams, fuchsia's coral seams rip, while the sower dreams. So she is the sower. She is the one who sows the seed. Now this is one of the inversions. In the traditional metaphor, it is a masculine. The sower is typically masculine. And the receiving fertile earth is feminine. She inverts that. Here we have a feminine sower breaking away from the convention. But what I also want you to pay attention to here is this beautiful garden is not attended well. She says, I tend my flowers. But ironically, she's not attending to that. The reason is that the seam, the seams of flower, one flower, fuchsia, is ripping apart. So garden is not really taken care. The flowers are not in place. They are showing the signs of not being taken care because the sower, who is apparently tending to the flowers, is dreaming because she is sleeping. There are then other flowers also. Geraniums, what is happening to geranium? They are tinting. They are fading probably, and there are spots on geranium. Again, the sign of the garden not taken care. Low daisies, drooping, probably low because drooping. They have dots, specks and dots. My cactus splits her beard to show her throat. Even the cactus is split open. So it's almost like the garden and all these flowers and plants need immediate attention. It is not happening because she's dreaming about the lover. It continues. Carnations tip their spice. What is tipping the spice? Spilling the fragrance. Spice here is fragrance. Carnations spilling their fragrance. And bees pick up. So bees have a feast. So they are picking up all the nectar. Then comes a hyacinth, I hid, puts out a ruffled head. So even that has discolored and probably it's withering. And odors fall, scattered all around. The fragrances are scattered all around, or maybe, what festers the plant might reek a bad smell also. Odors fall from flask. Flask is not the modern imagery of flask. Flask can only be a bottle-like holder. All flowers are flasks. So small, you marvel how they held. It's a very ironic title. I tend my flowers. And what I find is this dense corporeal presence of flowers and plants in this poem, which makes it completely different from a conventional pathetic fallacy. So, this adds a layer of complexity to that. Savita madam, you can always ask me to stop whenever, because I always have this crisis of not being able to finish in time. So please.
No, sir, it is wonderful. The way it's going is so interesting, so interesting. The last poem, all those, the spice and dot, all those active verbs, by God. Wonderful, sir. Just continue.
I'll take another 10-15 minutes more so that I will have a full discourse on this.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, I'll evoke another interesting situation in a canonical literary work, which is very relevant. It is Juliet in Romeo and Juliet who says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would smell as sweet." Now, this is a premise that we need to challenge, particularly if you are a poetic botanist and if you subscribe to vegetal poetics. And we should be saying that names do matter. in our own sensual apprehension of images. So we should be focusing our attention towards understanding when, how, and why plants are represented in literature, rather than just as a token of love or romance or exotic, or even while describing the physical beauty of a girl or a woman. So there is a movement, there is an effort of the title Poetic Botany. So this was an effort to study 18th century movement in which botany became the subject of poetry, as one of them being read out in this session. So botany became the subject, not just plants and flowers. And in these writings, even in the poem of Emily Dickinson, I believe the plants are the true protagonists. And they are which animates everything that follows. So these poetic botanists of the 18th century were very unlike Juliet. They would have been deeply concerned with each plant's name, identity also. Name is the first stage to give an identity and personhood. For them, the name would have revealed the plant's place in nature. So this is about bioregion. Every plant has its own bioregion. And when you are into bioregional imagination, you need to be accurate. Botanical accuracy is necessary in that kind of poetry. And these poetic botanists were devoted as much to the science of plants as much to their poetry. We saw that in the poem that we read out, The Rose. They hoped that their works would have offered the readers a glimpse into the secrets of nature, and in turn offered some insight into ourselves, that we understand ourselves much better in our own bioregion, in our own relations and our own understandings of the other stakeholders of nature. And these stakeholders include even plants. This leads me to the concept of vegetal agency. One of my favorite words is agency. We are all agential because we think, we speak, we do things for ourselves. That is agency. One who cannot do that has no agency. So vegetal agency is an idea that is developed by a wonderful scholar, Giulia Pacini. She is a professor of French and Francophone studies, but her current interest is in human arboreal relation, human arboreal trees, and arboreal representations, whether trees are rightfully represented or whether they are misrepresented in literary works. So she talks about the flow of tree sap into the discourses and literature. She says tree sap has been flowing into, it's a beautiful metaphor. Look at the metaphoricity of that expression. That our own discourse is enriched by tree sap. You know that there are many useful tree saps, including rubber. Many of them, economically, culturally, religiously. There are many of these tree saps which we have been using. And she says that literary discourse has been immensely helped by the tree sap. And she also explores the meaning of trees and arboreal representations from the body politic. That is with the key element. I mean the body by I mean is the corporeal representation, rightful corporeal representation, not distorted or a hyperbolic representation of them. And sap, incidentally, what is sap? Sap is incidentally the vegetal fluid which has been a productive trope. Trope is a figure of speech. Any figure of speech is a trope, metaphors. Among others, there are many other tropes which are in circulation in literary studies, like pruning, grafting, planting, replanting, and felling. Like all these metaphors, sap has also gathered a lot of significance according to Pacini. She also talks about conceptualization of vegetal eroticism. How human eroticism has been transferred onto the plant life and vegetal life. And also this idea of vegetal violence. Vegetal violence is the violence committed, murder committed by tree. It happens as a trope, I would say, in Gothic, very often in Gothic. In Harry Potter also, I was talking about that. In Harry Potter also, the tree is capable of creating violence. So these are distinct forms of what phytopoetics could be grounded upon. So the idea of vegetal agency, that a plant can do something for itself, plant can communicate, plant can have sensation, is a position that is completely against plant objectification. Like animal objectification, we have to do away with plant objectification also. That's the prejudice. And we know that there are certain plants with genders. There are male plants and female plants. And every flower also has the male and the female parts. So this objectification and using this pronoun it for a tree or a plant is something that we need to reconsider, according to Pacini. And she wrote a wonderful text study of the title Invaluable Trees, Cultures of Nature. Invaluable Trees, Cultures of Nature, again 2012. All of them, most of them published in 21st century. Okay. Coming to my major text that I was talking about, Plants in Contemporary Poetry, Eco-Criticism and Botanical Imagination by John Charles Ryan. He talks about the possibility of this interdisciplinary connections between the fields of neurobotany and literary plant studies, critical plant studies or literary plant studies, which incidentally is a subfield of eco-criticism. So neurobotany makes us aware that plants can feel. They have their own intricate nervous system, so they could feel, including the pain. And one of the justifications that we have in committing crime against a plant or a tree is that plant cannot feel. So his project, Ryan's project, and all the studies that he proposes aim to disclose, this is what he says, disclose the power of verse to anticipate parallel scientific thought. So he says there has been a parallel scientific thought along with artistic rendering of plants and trees. A freedom of imagination unrestrained by the prevailing discourses of botanical life. So, but awareness of botanical life has run parallel to literary expressions of trees and plants. So he uses the term phytocriticism extensively for that as an approach to literary criticism that is invested in phytophenomenology. That is, phytophenomenology is the consciousness of plants. Do plants and trees have their own consciousness? Are they conscious that they are plants? Ryan's argument is yes, they are. Or the botanical being in the world. So they are aware of they are being there in the world, and they are aware of their own status, is the point. We have a rich legacy of these great writers who are not necessarily the poets. We have Charles Darwin, Erasmus Darwin, right up to Michael Marder that I was talking about, who have worked extensively on plant thinking. Can plants think? And if they don't have brain, can they think? And also plant phenomenology, whether they can be conscious of themselves, is pivotal to Ryan's understanding of vegetal dialectics that he talks about. The oppositional truth or awareness that comes through oppositions, poetry and science, botany and poetry, and so on. He tries to weave a vegetal dialectics which brings out a more complex and relevant truth. The term vegetal imagination in Ryan's perspective is all about the vegetal dialectics through that one arrives through a consideration of this divide, basic divide, the plant soul and plant body. As I said, I'm more interested in plant body because that is more tangible a presence even in literary expressions. So we look at this dialectic in terms of plant soul and plant body. And poetry, he believes, can generate what he then calls the ensoulment of plants as active, percipient, and responsive being. They're active, they also do respond. So that happens when we understand poetry has this function of representing plants as responsive beings and not passive beings. And he talks about two of the great contemporary poets. One is this Leslie Murray, who is the Australian poet. And there is a very good collection, a seminal collection of the title Presence, Translations from the Natural World. Presence, Translations from the Natural World by Murray, in which Murray talks about these plants and flowers, and many of his poems are voiced by plants, very interestingly. Many of the poems are voiced by plants in a kind of a shamanistic convention. And what is shamanistic convention? If you go to the native literature, and even we were talking about the tribal presence, they all have this convention of speaking in the voices of less celebrated figures. Plants and trees become those voices which are otherwise less celebrated in the culture. And most of his poems are like that. And another writer that Ryan talks about is Mary Oliver. She was an American poet, and her poems were inspired by her lonely walks into the wild. And one very, very meaningful collection is of the title New and Selected Poems, published in 1992. New and Selected Poems. Murray, for example, Murray demonstrates this pan-entheistic understanding. That's slightly different from pantheistic. Pantheism is a belief that all is God, everything is God. Pan-entheism retains the differences and comes out with the idea God is greater than the universe. There's a slight difference between pantheism and panentheism. And Murray is more panentheistic, while making an effort to understand the plant souls. And Mary Oliver represents an ethical relationship between humans and plants. And she tells that cannot maintain that plant bodies are disposable material. She insists that plant bodies are not disposable. It's all about the disposable bodies in our culture. And what can be cut, what can be chopped and felled, and so on. So she argues for a more ethical relationship between human beings and plants. And Ryan, I'll just talk about this, and then maybe I will come to my the later slide. Ryan tries to establish these interdisciplinary connections between neurobotany and literary plant studies, which of course is a branch of eco-criticism. And he traces both natural history and botanical experience in poetry. Poetry is not just imaginative, it's grounded imagination. We find vital botanical information and experience in poetry. And in that context, he talks about, and one of very, very popular American poet, Louis Gluck. Louis Gluck, incidentally, is a Nobel Prize winner. She won the Nobel in 2020. And her seminal connections, very prolific writer, maybe she might have written more than 50 collections of poems. And one of them, which could be evoked here, is of the title The Wild Iris, which she published in 1992, which is more about how poetry can resist to the erasure of the past injustice towards vegetal bodies. How contemporary poetry can bring plants and trees back into the discourse. And in that context, this poem, The Wild Iris, all the poems in that, it's the title, made of many poems. Most of these poems are set in a garden. Garden is a setting with three voices, three characters. At one level, we have flowers, many poems where flowers are the speakers. They have these flowers speaking to the gardener poet. And the second speaker is a gardener poet who undergoes some change after listening to the flowers. And there is also the voice and the presence of the omniscient God figure. So now what she does here is she creates a kind of a cognitive or a philosophical tripod on which the vegetal bodies and vegetal lives are understood eventually. And that's what she calls that as a dialogue of memories between human beings and between plants and human beings, not human beings and plants, but between plants and human beings. And Gluck thereby endows these plants with the ability to have memories of themselves, understanding of their own environmental context, and they do understand the consequences of human action as well. This is the true plant agency that I was talking about. So we'll just read quickly this poem by Gluck, and then I'll come to my concluding part. So the speaker here is a poppy, not a human being. The great thing is not having a mind. Feelings, oh, I have those. They govern me. Here is a flower which states that it can feel. I have a Lord in heaven called the sun, and open for him, showing him the fire of my own heart. Fire like his presence. So it is a flower's perspective of sun. And also the flower, the color, and it, in a way, it mirrors probably the fire and color of the sun. What could such glory be, if not a heart? Oh, my brothers and sisters, the flower is now addressing human beings. Were you like me once, long ago, before you were human? Did you permit yourselves to open once who would never open again? Because, in truth, I'm speaking now the way you do. I speak because I am shattered. It's the agony of a flower, which blooms only once and then dies. Understanding this timeline of the life of a flower is also very significant, and that's what Gluck forces us to do. I will not get into this because it might, there is a concept of plant time. Plant time is about understanding time in terms of seasons and other aspects. And there is also this concept of botanical melancholia, That is the depth of a plant which evokes some emotional responses such as lamentation in human subjects. So that's seen largely in the writings of this Australian Aboriginal activist and a poet, Judith Wright. I'll not make you read this because it will take a lot more time. Not even this. Yeah, I'll come to this last part of my argument. We are into what is called this green streaked analysis, wherein we are trying to reverse the plant blindness that we have, which is the tendency of human beings neither notice nor value plants in the environment. They are also trying to focus sharply on the auditory, visual, textual, haptic, and even haptic production throughout. Haptic is about touch, tactile, throughout the history, which would examine the symbolic prominence of botanical life. Botanical imagination, thereby, in literary criticism, I believe, is an attempt to become with plants through poetry, not just understand, examine, but becoming plants through poetry. So in this regard, it's a beautiful study by Molly Mahood of the title, The Poet as Botanist. Mahood is a British literary critic, and she has been investigating the relationship between poetry and plant science. And one of that I would highlight here. She talks about, among other things, she talks about there is a plant called ghost orchids in England. Ghost orchid gains its name because it vanishes very quickly. A plant or a flower which is seen at one place very soon will vanish like a ghost. And it's in a coral colored root, runs deeper and lateral, and after a while the plant will surface somewhere else. Vegetating largely through the root. So she talks about that, and this vanishing orchid has disappeared, according to her, from the British landscape. It has disappeared, and it has. When she wrote this, she says for last 16 years, the plant was not seen. Must have become extinct. And she talks about the efforts of a British poet of the name Charles Longley. Charles Longley, who wrote about this ghost orchids. So she says, this is how a poet becomes a botanist. Creates a verbal, metaphorical herbarium of some rare plant. So green streaked analysis is being attentive to the representation of vegetal life, to the forest, trees, bushes, flowers, herbs, orchids, wildflowers, garden plants, and even weeds, I would say, in cultural artifacts. They have been rendered many times, thickly, in many art forms. I will also not talk much about this, apart from just one point that there is a kind of taxonomic chauvinism that we practice, that some species being bigger, greater, and more important. And there is also, like speciesism, we have zoocentrism. That's anthropocentrism, then comes zoocentrism. If at all we accept animals. So zoocentrism is as detrimental for plants as much anthropocentrism is for animals. These are my references, and then I would conclude with a point that poetry, after reading all this, I feel poetry is a form of photosynthesis. It is a form of photosynthesis because it takes sunlight of imagination and experience It takes the sunlight of imagination and experience, and with the help of the chlorophyll of human sensation, it tries to make wonderful food for thought and for entertainment. Thank you so much.
Excellent, sir. Excellent.
Thank you so much for such an enlightening speech, sir. I'm very sure that all the listeners have benefited immensely from your wonderful presentation.
My pleasure.
As we all have learned so many new terminologies and their meanings today. Also, I'm sure that there must be many questions popping up in the minds of the participants.
Yes.
So the question and answer session will be taken by Dr. Shilpi Bhattacharya. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Shweta. Dr. Nair, it was truly a delight listening to you, especially the concepts like mind of plants, vegetal intelligence, philosophy of plants, plant blindness, vegetal motives. When you talked about the Arabesque pattern and connected it with feminist theory, oxytocin from tree hugging, and then your concluding note, poetry is photosynthesis. So I'm seriously looking forward to read some of the authors that you have mentioned. And as I was carried away by your words, and I was seeing here in the YouTube link also, there were so many words of appreciation, very informative, very interesting, wonderful session, exceptionally new insight, fantastic presentation. So many words of appreciations have been posted on this YouTube link, and along with a few queries also. But as I feel that there is some time constraint, I'll be picking up few of them. So the first query is like it's from Dr. Aparna Mukherjee, who asked, do we have any study on plant psychology, just as we have studies on plant physiology?
No, we don't have so much so, but then there is a branch, as I mentioned, coming up under neurobotany.
Okay.
Neurobotany, which largely analyzes the plant responses and plant behavior.
Okay. So, Dr. Aparna, probably you got your answer. The next question is, sir, that what was your inspiration that made you inclined towards such an exhaustive topic like botanical imagination that goes beyond in exploring the subfields of eco-criticism?
Thanks for that question. One is that I've been working in the last 10 years or so, I've been working in the domain of eco-criticism. But this pandemic and, the idea of that we are interconnected, we are dependent on so many things. One of the things that happened with me, that I started taking gardening a little seriously, that my own plants, plants are my emotional support beings. They are not just my plants. And politically correct term would have been emotional support beings. So I have been drawing a lot upon the plants in my very little space that I have in my metropolitan background. But I've been using that space. And then it's almost like daily we have a conversation, we do interact. And I understand they do communicate when they want water and when they are in excess of water and so on. So I'm trying to pick up that. So that is the motivation. And then secondly, I was going a little more into this interdisciplinary mode ever since the pandemic, thinking that this isolated existence of a discipline will not matter anymore. I believe that there has been a pandemic turn, like so many other turns, gender turn, and so I believe that we have to acknowledge that even literary studies have taken a turn, and this is one of them.
Very true, sir. Yeah. So the next question that we have is, what, according to you, are the variegated possibilities through phytocriticism and vegetal dialects?
Vegetal dialects or dialectics?
Vegetal dialectics.
Okay. Vegetal dialectics could help us to understand our own prejudices deeper. For example, as I told you, useful plant, a crop and a weed. Now we have this distinction, crop and a weed. That's extremely man-made polarity. And nature doesn't recognize that.
True.
So we understand maybe our own situations negotiating this dialectical position. And what was the first part of the question?
What are the variegated possibilities through phytocriticism?
Phytocriticism opens the entire literary cultural analysis in the context of the representation of plants.
Okay.
We could study any novel, any poem for the presence and even for the absence of plants. Why only presence? We could also look at the absence of plants and trees.
Yeah, very true. Thank you for the insight, sir. So one last question I'll be taking. How can the visibility of botanical imagination enhance the understanding of children's literature?
In fact, I would say that's a wonderful question. Thank you for that. One part that I didn't deliberately mention is all about lots of children's ideas, concepts, basic concepts and ideas are organized around plants and trees. That is why we have so many nursery rhymes with plants. Here we go around the mulberry bush, right? Look at that. Alice in Wonderland. We have lots of these folk tales. We have a lot of these children's tales and nursery rhymes, which are organized around plants and trees. And ironically, children are taken away from the plants and trees. That is the whole irony. But I believe the best way of, in fact, extending their own imagination and their understanding can be through plants.
Very true, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So here we let's take one more, sir, because the chat box is honestly flooded with the questions. Let me take one last question, sir. It's Gagananand Singh who asks that what is the difference between the psychology of plants and human in alien soil?
Human in alien soil.
Yeah.
And psychology of plants. But I don't know. See, in a bioregional situation, when we are looking at bioregional imagination, or if you look at a poem by Wordsworth or Shelley as an expression of bioregional imagination, where they reflect, say, for example, the Lake District and the vegetation of that, I don't think they are talking about alien plants. The situation of an alien plant happens, that psychology happens in terms of a plant, happens when plants are trafficked. When plants are trafficked, which is also being done. So if a plant is translocated, then the plant receives a shock, not the seed. If the plant is translocated, the plant receives a shock. Definitely, it is traumatic. In fact, there have been some experiments where anesthetic injections have been administered into plants while uprooting and shifting them or even felling them. So that probably is one point. But aliens, human aliens in land, I don't know. Humans in alien lands, maybe migration, if that is the case, if that is what the person has in mind. Yeah, human migration, there could be some parallel between plant migration and human migration. The only difference is very often human migration is agential. I do it very often for myself. But I take a plant with me. Very often, when people I'll evoke a situation, at the time of Kalapani, Indian indentured laborers going to the Caribbean, they had taken Tulsi with them without even knowing that whether Tulsi will run roots in the alien land. But then they had done that. So you find Tulsis in the Caribbean. Or a neem tree. Saplings were taken along with them. So when human beings travel, they invariably take seeds, plants, and so on. So there is some correlation, very interesting correlation. You could study that also.
Thank you, sir. So, Gagananand Singh, I think you got your answer. It was a wonderful insight by Dr. Nair. So, thank you so much, sir, for patiently attending to the queries of the participants of this webinar, for being with us and extending such warm gesture. Thank you so much. And here, I would like to inform all the participants that feedback link is posted in the chat box. Please fill it and you will be receiving the e-certificates in your email IDs. Thank you so much, sir. Over to Shweta.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just a word. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation, very insightful, very interesting. And about gardening, we our gardeners who are not educated also say that put all the plants together because they need to touch each other. You're talking about haptics.
Correct.
The plants need to touch each other. If you as a person touch the plant, it responds better. So those ideas, we keep on thinking of. Even my granddaughters, I tell them that, come on, plant this tree. This is yours. Look after it. Usko pani do, touch. We do that. And another thing that you spoke about, plants and weeds. Now, suddenly in my garden, I saw some weeds growing and I asked my gardener that what is this? Has suddenly come up and it's strangling the other plants. It was just like, covering all the plants. So he said, I did not know that. He said, ye Amrit Bale hai. It does not have roots.
Right.
Is it Amrit Bale? It does not need to have roots. It just will just fly and come and settle down somewhere like that. I did not know that. So sometimes really these things, when you come to understand that Amrit, if it's Amrit, it does not need anything else to survive. Yeah. It's Amrit in itself. So thank you so much, sir. Lots and lots of
my pleasure.
Thought-provoking, sir. Very thought-provoking. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir, for accepting my invitation.
My pleasure. I've been equally enriched by the interaction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of everyone, on behalf of the participants, I understand that they are truly, truly enlightened today. So here we arrive at the end of the 6th Dr. Jb Singh Memorial Lecture Series. We will have many more such knowledgeable sessions in the days to come. To formally conclude the event, I will request Ms. Vinti Ravalkar to extend vote of thanks to all those who have made this event a huge success. Over to you, Vinti.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Our most esteemed invited guests, participants, and valued members of English Language Teachers Association of India, ELT Raipur chapter. I am very humbled and honored to be the one making the closing remarks and delivering the vote of thanks in such a distinguished and intellectually stimulating gathering. First and foremost, I would love to accolade JB Singh sir for being the most unforgettable personality and for leaving his indelible marks in the field of education. We definitely miss him and aim to cherish his memories and promote literary enhancements through these memorial lectures. Then I would love to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Dinesh Nair for accepting our invitation and gracing the session with his presence and wonderful deliberation. Thank you, sir. I would also like to extend my gratefulness to all the valued participants for attending the event in the only leisure day that they get on Sunday. So we are very grateful for you to attend this event and making it a grand success. I would also like to express my thankfulness to Ramakant Prasad sir for his technical support and cooperation. Shukla Banerjee, Mrs. Chitrangi Iyer, and Mr. Amit Jha for taking out time from their busy schedule and being a part of this event, especially for sharing their beautiful memories and paying tribute to our beloved JB Singh sir. And at last, but not the least, I express my thankfulness to all the members of ELT Raipur chapter for their efforts, cooperation, and support in making the event successful one. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. But before I end, I would love to quote Mr. John F. Kennedy, which says, I quote, "As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that us to utter words, but to live by them." Unquote. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So, may I take your leave with your permission? Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, yes.